Okay, so today we're going to take a look at building your own Drupal API site. Basically copying what is api.drupal.org, or if you've seen Drupal Contrib, or Lullabot has one, and a lot of other people do too. We're looking at Drupal, but technically as long as it's PHP and commented properly, you should be able to actually generate documentation for other things besides just Drupal. So it's just about me. My name is Ron. RL Northcutt is my handle pretty much everywhere. Twitter, Drupal, Gmail, Facebook, IRC, some variation. I'm a developer with Jackson River. We make, usually working for nonprofits and governmental agencies to make large sites. We have a distribution called Springboard, which marries commerce in 7, UberCart in 6, and some custom stuff. It syncs up with Salesforce in the back. It's a bit of a beast, but fun to work with. If any of you are thinking of looking for some place to work or wondering about possibly looking for a place to work, let me know. We're always hiring, and it's a really good company. It's the first real job I've had in like 12 years, where I haven't just been freelance, and there's a reason for that. I get to work from home, which is cool, and I get to co-work with the people that happen to work in Austin when I want to. RealTidings.com is just my personal site. I usually post things out there that I find interesting or solutions to problems. Typically, I'll keep notes and unpublish things, and then every few months I'll go through and finish them up and push a whole big bunch out. I've been using Drupal since 4.6. I wasn't really developing then. I was just building things for myself. And then somewhere toward the end of 5, I started developing sites for other people, and by the time 6 came, I was doing good with it. Husband and father, and all-around good guy. I'm a good guy, so you can take my word for it. That's how you know. Okay, so why are we even interested in creating a documentation site? I mean, you can always go to api.drupal.org, you can go to Drupal Contrib. Why would you want to build your own? Well, a couple reasons. First one that pops to mind is in case you don't have a connection. If you're on an airplane, if your internet connection goes down, if you're staying with relatives or traveling, what have you. If you are traveling, and even if you're tethered on like your phone or something, and you're trying to do everything you can to keep your bandwidth down so you don't get totally slammed, it's a great thing to do. It's very convenient to have it set up on your local. Not only because it's right there and you can go and get it, but because it's your site, you can set it up the way you want. You can create links to specific things you go to a lot, shortcuts, you can do whatever kind of theme you want, you can put other blocks in there, you can put other code in there, which is really valuable when you have your own custom code. I recently, one of the things that I'm working on with Jackson River is a project for the Democratic House representatives, the staffers. I've been working on the intranet there. And that predates me. It goes back to 5 and was migrated to 6, and there's a ton of custom stuff. And getting thrown in that project was really difficult, and one of the things that really helped was the lead developer on the project, a really cool guy named Ben Clark. He said, hey, look, you need to just set up your own documentation site, which will tell you what the functions are and how they relate and what they look like and all that other good stuff. And that really helped me. If you've got a team you're working on, particularly if you're working on some custom code, or even if it's a lot of contrib stuff, but it's kind of your own parcel, the things that you like, it's nice to have all that stuff in one place. And just for fun. I mean, come on, we're Drupal guys and girls, and we're geeks, and we like to do cool things. And this is a very cool thing to do. So there's 2 basic ways to do this. There's the quote-unquote long way, and that's kind of doing everything by hand. You can go to this node, or you can actually just go look up the API module, and it has a link over there for this. Basically, you create your Drupal site, you install the modules that you need in the libraries. There's a grammar parser library that you need to grab. Set up your code repositories on the site, and then you go through and tell the API modules where they are and what they relate to. Then it will go, and you'll have to run cron about 1 billion times. You know, maybe not 1 billion, but dozens of times to go through and parse all the data and build all that information out. So luckily there is a shorter way. It's very easy. We're going to go through it here in a minute. There is a Drupal API install profile now, which is very handy. You can go and grab that. You install it with the profile. You run the code updater, which will grab the latest versions of the repositories. They actually have a nice little shell script that does that. And then you can customize it and do whatever you like. So real quick, while we're here, I am going to go ahead and do that. So basically what you can see, and let me jump back out here. Okay. So what I've done here is I've actually can't type today. Okay. What I've done is I've actually already downloaded the install profile. That's the Drupal API 7.x. I would recommend in this case that you do go with the 1.3. There is a more recent dev version. I tried to use that, and there were a lot of errors and some broken things. Running this one, I did get one error during install, but it picked up again and finished out, so that was nice and easy. I've already unzipped this and put it into the public folder. So when we go in, we can see it's just like a normal install. So I'm sure you've seen this stuff before. I'm just going to burn through it really quick. This is in Drupal 7, by the way, which is nice. Okay. And we're actually going to kind of skip a step here, hopefully. Normally you'll see right down here it says index API. After it goes through and creates the site, it's going to then run through and do the initial indexing on a batch. That took me about 30 minutes, so I'm not going to do it right now. Actually, it took about 20 minutes, I guess, and then it errored out, and then it took another 20 minutes. So that's what it's trying to look at now and say, hey, yeah. And it's already indexed all the files except for one. So we're just going to pretend like it already did that. OK, and so here you go. What you don't see here is I did go ahead and put the admin menu in here because I like it and it's convenient for me. But this is very much like what you would see at api.drupal.org. So if we want to go look up hook form alter, because that's one of the loveliest little hooks that we use all the time, then here it is. And it's right here, and it's handy and good to go. So that's one of the nice things about using the install profile, is that it does a lot of that stuff for you. So once you've done it, though, it's dated. I think it's running 7.19 instead of 2.2, which you can just do your regular updates, strush up, or manually pulling stuff down, whatever you want to do for that. But for the actual code that's in the repo, that's probably a very important point to make. The code that you're using to run the site is not the code that you're pulling and creating the documents from. So what you actually have is in the profile itself, there's a libraries folder. In the libraries folder is where the profile has already stuck Drupal 6 and Drupal 7, and it's pulling from those. So there's a script that is included in the profile that will let you go out and do those things. So let me see if we can grab it. Okay, the Drupal API. Okay, and there it is, update.sh. Okay, and now it's going to go through and do all of that wonderful stuff for us. So that's really, really handy. The only real downside to that is that there's a bunch of other stuff, some other documentation stuff that is included in it outside of just the core. I'm not entirely sure why it's there. I saw an issue in there, and someone's asked that it be removed, and they said it'd be a really nasty patch to do it, so they'll do it later. But like I said, just to get going, this is something you can do very easily and get yourself down the road. So, and again, after you run this, and we'll take a look at it in a minute, you're going to have to update by running cron many, many times. So that's something that we're going to take a look at because there are ways around that as well. Okay, so moving right along. Adding in the core stuff is great. It's very handy, but again, it's not giving you that much use. So what you really want is you want to be able to add your own code, your own modules. That process is, if you go back to the quote-unquote long way, you're simply mimicking that same process again. You download the code that you're trying to grab. You put it in the repo in the library. You actually create a project on your API site. You create the branches. I'll show you that in a second. And then, again, you got to run cron to update. But actually, there is a little shell script that's out there that you can quickly cut and paste. And that will run through and do all of the cron stuff for you, which is nice and handy. OK, good. All looking well. So what I'm going to do is, like I said, internally we use, we've got a distribution called Springboard. And Springboard is a ton of modules that do all kinds of crazy stuff. Some of the stuff is, because we use a lot of forms for donation forms and things, there's a lot of like web form things. There's a cool module called email wrappers, which helps you with formatting emails. And then there's another one, I believe, buried somewhere in here that does some cool stuff with letting you actually override the template on a page. But Springboard's out there, and it's a big mamba jamba. So it's going to be really handy for me to actually have this on my system. So while that's trying to finish up over there, as you saw, there was an error. Simply the way it goes. Alrighty. So we can put it anywhere we want inside here. I'm not going to put this in the same profile library just because I don't like digging in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to put it in the regular sites all. Okay. Alrighty. Okay. Okay, so now that's downloading all of that stuff. Let's check back over. It's still choking on trying to update something. I don't know what that is, but it doesn't really matter because we're just going to move on down the road. So now, once we're in here, if we go take a look at the, I believe it's under Configuration, Development, API Reference. Still waiting to parse that one. This is where we're actually going to go in and start adding in the modules or themes or even entire other code bases that you want to parse through. Now, one thing to note is that what I'm downloading is a suite of modules. And so while you can go in, and you may want to, if you really like things organized, and you can add each module individually, it's going to crawl through everything you tell it. So you can also add a group. So for example, if you have a group of contrib modules that you like to use or you tend to use a lot, instead of going in and adding each one individually, you could simply tell, you could stick them all in the same directory, and you could have the documentation generated for all of them at once, which might be what you want to do. OK, so I'm going to call this Springboard. And these are modules. Cool. Alrighty. So now we've gone in and we've created a new project, but there currently aren't any branches associated with it. So nothing is being crawled. The reason we do this is because, like, for example, in Springboard, we have we have several different versions. We've got one for 6, which is 6.3.x, and then the one for 7 is actually the 4.x. So technically, internally, we call it Springboard 3 and Springboard 4. You could also say Springboard for 6 or Springboard for 7. So the next thing that we want to do is actually create the branch. And right now, when I just cloned the Git repo for the 7.4.x branch. What I could do is clone it again, just change out that branch to the 6 one, and then do whatever I'm going to do, but I'm not going to do that here today. So today, I'm going to go in and add a new branch just for the 4. So we want to know what project this is, and that was going to be the Springboard. Core compatibility is 7. It is the preferred branch. So like, for example, if you have multiple branches set up, just like we have in Drupal, where you'll have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 7 would probably be your preferred. You could also set 8 to be your preferred if you want to get really optimistic about the future. But in this case, we're just going to say that this one is preferred. So this one is going to be just Springboard 4. Okay. And then it's just going to be 4. So directories. Now you're going to be able to put in where to actually look to crawl through the code. You can put in more than one, and you can also, as you see in the next section, you can actually exclude directories within there. So if you want to get really crazy with what you're doing and not doing, you can go for it. So let's see. Looks like we're done here, so that's good. So I'm actually going to cheat a little bit. There we go. Okay. Okay, so I don't have to worry about my typing skills. This should work pretty cleanly. So all I'm doing is I'm sending it out to look for this particular repository out there where it is. I did toy with seeing if you could, pull it from an active, and that is possible, but it's not recommended because you're going to be changing things and things are going to quickly get out of line. Wherever you're pulling your documentation from, you want it to be someplace that's relatively static so that when you go in and you update it, the code, and then go through and update your documentation, you know exactly where it is. But if you want to do something crazy and you've got like a dev branch or something that's highly volatile, and you're running cron a lot, then that might actually do it. Okay, what did I miss? Oh, I see. Okay. There we go. Alrighty, so now we've created the branch for Springboard, which is Drupal 7. And if we go back to the overview, this thing is still stuck out there. Let's see. So if I reset, that's not going to do what I want. Okay, so now we're seeing the bug is popping up and stopping what I want to do. That's fine. What I could do is go out and look up and see exactly what was getting stopped up and try and fix it. But again, I'm not going to do that either.
What happens if you do press reset? What does that do?
Let's find out. I believe all it does is it's going to go out on the next cron run and index everything again and figure out the list of what needs to be changed. Right now you see that it set the number of jobs to 0. So, well, we can also just do it, It's just drush cron, right? Let's see what happens now. Okay, while it's thinking about that, I'm actually going to come over here and take a look at this shell script, and we're going to do this real quick so that we can see this. So this is the instructions online for the quote-unquote long version. What I would recommend, if you are pretty confident, I would say just go for the long version. If you are fuzzy about how this works or what have you, I would say do the install profile, go through, and once you've seen it work once, you'll probably be like, okay, now I got it. And then maybe go through and do the quote-unquote long version. But down here under step 3.5, there's a lovely little script that uses drush. So we're just going to do this real quick. Okay. There we go. Alrighty. So I'm going to, let's just call it API cron. Okay. Put it in. Yes. Alrighty. And then we should just be able to make it executable. Alrighty. And let's check it. Okay, cool. That looks good. Excuse me. Okay, so cron finished running. And so now if we go back, then we should see that there are, oh, cool, okay. It didn't actually do all of them, only the ones for Springboard, and then probably that one that was left over, which we'll see what happens when it tries to do that again. So I'm going to try this again, and we'll go ahead and run this while we talk about other things. Okay. So now that script is going to run through and do all the updating, and meanwhile, we can leave and go get a cup of coffee and feel awesome about how our computer's working for us. Okay, great. So while it's doing that, there are a couple of other things. So we've done kind of the, I would say the hard part, but that's actually the easy part. The work isn't actually setting up the documentation. The actual work is getting the documentation to take place. So I'm sure a lot of you are probably familiar with how that works and why. I'm just going to breeze through it pretty quick. Lots of good stuff out there. But anybody that's looked at, that's actually looked at Drupal code has already seen the doc blocks at the beginnings of functions. And you've seen the @param and @return and @file and all these other fun things. The reason we do this is documentation is just a good idea. So if somebody else comes along in your company or your client or another developer down the road and wants to know how to do something, they can see how this function works, why you did the things you did, or even if it's just for yourself. Because if you come back in a week, 2 weeks, a month, you're going to be like, okay, now what was I thinking again? How does this work? How does this fit with the other thing? Because I've already done 6 or 7 other things otherwise. Another cool thing is a lot of IDEs these days will actually have some of the parsing built in as well. So you'll get a certain degree of, if you start typing in a function that you're trying to call, a lot of times you can actually, they'll actually autocomplete, or they'll give you hints and things like that, which is very handy when you're coding. Of course, to get your code ready for being made into documentation, not only for yourself, but remember there's other people too who might be using your code later on. So this is, I don't know if you guys know who Krell is, Larry Garfield. I'm just paraphrasing here from his Code Smells presentation, which if you have not seen is really, really good. There's a link there at the bottom. If you come across core or contrib code that's missing comments, then open a critical bug on the issue queue. If anyone complains, tell them to talk to me. When I first heard him say that, I honestly thought he was kidding at first. And then he literally followed up and said, no, I'm serious. And his point is that if your code is not commented even a little bit, it's really not complete. It may function and it may work, but it's not maintainable. You can't get any documentation out of it. You can't hand it off to someone else and make their life easier. So actually doing code with your comments is really just part of being a developer and a good steward. And the way that this whole thing works is through Doxygen, which is a generator that goes through, looks for these patterns in the code, knows how to read what those are and what those tokens like @param and @return, and that's actually what's helping to do this magic of creating all this stuff. So if you look at the coding standards for Drupal, it tells you how to do these things, and there's a reason it tells you to do those things. So a couple of tips for writing code and how to get good comments. I'm sure some of you have probably heard this quote before. Always code as if the person who will maintain your code is a maniac serial killer that knows where you live. And as soon as they start getting frustrated because they can't understand what you're doing or why, that they're going to come and hunt you down. It's a bit extreme, but the point is valid. I mean, you got to think about the people that come after you, which again, may very well be yourself. One thing that I do, not always, but when I can, is actually start writing my comments and my functions before I write code. This doesn't always work, and it's almost never the way it ends up, because you get in and things change and you have to modify things. But what it can help you do is it help you go through and you're figuring out what does this function do, what are the inputs, what are the outputs. And you do that for all of your functions before you start writing them, and you know which ones are going to go in and say, okay, I'm going to need to do something in there. That's going to be a function. These are the inputs. These are the outputs. That can actually help you when I've actually gone into projects where we actually started writing a module, and there was a junior developer that was coming on, hasn't really done a whole lot of programming, and because we were both going to be working on it and I went in and did that, it actually made it a lot easier for us both to work on it without stepping on each other's toes and getting in each other's way. So there were certain things I said, okay, look, I personally like to divide my code out into smart, or what I think are smart, include files. And so I was like, well, look, you work on the admin form and some of the functions for the admin side. I'm going to work on these things. I know what is going to be coming out of that because I defined going in what those are going to look like. So I can over here work on the code that's going to be making use of those, even though I haven't created those yet. So that can help keep things nice and tidy. Again, another one from Krell is every function or method should do a single thing. Obviously, that's not always possible, but you'd be surprised, whenever possible, if you can kind of make things smaller and more segmented, you can actually get a lot more organization and clarity out of what's going on. Run Coder. Does anybody here run Coder, the Coder module? Yeah, good, good. Coder, and then if you really want to, there's another add-on module called Coder Tough Love. What this does is Coder will actually go through and run through your code, and you can specify the entire code base or specific modules. You can set different flags like, I'm updating this code from 6 to 7. What are things to look for? I want to look for really strict rule sets for how it should be coded or really loose. It'll go through and look for things like the way that you do comments or the way that you, if there's any extra spaces or if you have tabs or if you have too many spaces or all of those types of things. And it'll give you a nice list. And then you can go through the list and make everything nice and clean. And you'll be much, much closer to the coding standards. Now, I don't know why, but even if you run that and then you put something in Drupal and then the code checks are run there, it seems like it always finds more stuff there that I thought it was like beautiful and clean code, but it wasn't. But it gets you really far down the road. And finally, develop an appreciation for beautiful code. I mean, there's something really gratifying about creating something that works and then taking a little bit of time to go through and put some polish on it, make it look good, make it work good, make it understandable. Maybe no one else is ever going to see this code, ever. It's possible. That happens all the time. But number one, you're going to see it, and you're going to know that it's good and that it's solid and it's something you can be proud of. And number two, if somebody else does come along and see it, then it's less likely that they're going to say, man, WTF, this is insane. Now, they may say that, but they'll say, you know what, this is insane, but damn, that's some beautiful code. I got to give the guys something for that. So let's take a look at, real quick, at hook form alter. Just because we've got some time to fill. So let's see. We over here, let's pull it up again. Form alter. Alrighty. Okay, so this is code that is the documentation that's generated from the code, and that's I think that's a really, really beautiful thing, that the code that you have actually contains the documentation. All this is doing is pulling that stuff out. It's the same type of beauty that we see when people go out and they drive on the roads and the streets, and they don't have to have instructions telling them that this road is going to be a forced turn left, or this is going to be a one-way, or any of these other things, because the instructions for how to use the road are built into the road through the lines and the signs and the lights and all these things. And it's a relatively simple system with a lot of complexity. And we see the same thing here. All of this stuff actually lives in the code itself, which I see it's still running. We can actually go take a quick look at. And I believe it's in system. Here. You know what? All we have to do is look right down here. Actually, let's do this. Line 1668, module system, system API.php. So we pull this up. I don't know if it actually shows us the code on here. There we go. View source. Oh, there it is. It's just really big. Okay. So we're not even actually in the code right now, but we can actually see the code. So we're looking for 1668. Very handy to come down here. And there it is, hook form alter. And this is it. I mean, everybody uses it. This is actually what's happening. Well, this is actually just an example. But this is what's actually pulling for the documentation. And if you look, you can see these are the comments up at the top. Here's where we're setting the parameters and what they are in the descriptions. And here's where we're seeing the, see also little marks that are the links over here. So all of this stuff lives in the code, and you could go and just read through the code and figure this out. But I think we can all agree that this is a little bit more convenient and easier for us to use. Okay. So homework. If any of you want it or need it. So what I recommend is that you definitely set up a documentation site for yourself, at least. Even if you just go grab the install profile and throw it up locally and just see how it works. It's not going to hurt. Like I said, it'll take you 30 minutes, 40 minutes. And if nothing else, at some point in time, it's going to become handy. You're talking to a client, you're talking to your boss, you're talking to another developer, and it comes up, oh yeah, well, we can always just spin up a documentation site. Yeah, I've done that before. It's like, boom, instant cred, and it's really easy. If you've got a team that you work with, either developers that you work with, or maybe you're contracted out to someone else, it's really, really handy to get organized and get your code in one place and have that as a resource for everybody to use. The other nice thing is, when you're doing that, you're always going to have some people really like to do comments and are really good at it. Some people don't. They always say, oh, I'll get to it later, and then they never do. When you have an actual documentation site and people know that stuff's going to end up there or not, and then they're going to get, they're going to get bounced on because somebody can't figure out how to use their code, it makes people a little bit more conscious about doing those things and how it gets done. So a little bit of accountability is out there, and it makes it nice. For a client, now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this for if you're just building a site for somebody that's running a little store or something like that, that all they're doing is logging in and maybe adding or editing content. They obviously don't care and they don't need it. But a lot of times we work with clients who have their own internal IT team. Maybe it's somebody that does some stuff, somebody that we're kind of training up. And again, doing something like this can make it easier not only for the client, but also the code that you're writing for them. So when they call you in 6 months, and you come back, you may not have this documentation set up on your local, but if you have it set up for them on an intranet or on a password-protected subdomain or however you want to do it, then you know that you're going to be able to come back later. You might need to go and update it. That's obviously very easy to do, but you're going to be able to get access to that and have your own resources right there tied to the client. Also for the community, I mean, we see like Drupal Contrib, we see Lullabot has one. There are several companies that do things like this. If you've got a module or a suite of modules that you promote, that you support, and especially if you have a site of some type which is talking about them, why not have some of that information out there? Odds are it's not going to be in the regular contrib unless it's something pretty big. So putting something like that out there, again, very easy to do, nice way that you can give back, but also a really good way that you can hopefully get some other people interested using your module, possibly doing things like, oh, I don't know, co-maintaining, submitting bug fixes, testing, all of those kinds of things. And then finally, a non-Drupal PHP project. Like I said, it is possible. I have not done that, so I can't speak personally to how well that works, but it's totally possible, and people do that. So that's something else you can do as well. If you've got something that you're using or someone else is using, you might even use Drupal to make an API site for a completely different CMS or something else. Why not? That's totally valid. Okay, so let's go back and double check. And it looks like it's almost done running, but let's see here. If we can go in here and take a look at what's already possibly there. Let's see. Okay, so we've still got a little ways to go on this, but it's humming along. So what we can do, and again, this is one of the reasons why you kind of want your own. By default, you'll notice we're only seeing Drupal 7 and 6 up here, and the search right here is for Drupal 7. So if I do a search for something in Springboard, it's not going to show up. However, if I go to, I think it's projects, maybe it's API projects. There we go. I can see that Springboard is here. So it would be really handy for me to at least just put a link for this right up here or somewhere else. And again, if I had another repo that just had the contrib modules I use all the time, then that could be another one. If I had another one that was for a specific client, I could go in and maybe by using the excludes, for example, or only pulling in my sites all modules custom, only pull in the documentation that's relevant to that client, then I could have my clients listed up here too. I mean, it's your own site. You can go crazy and do what you want, but that gets really, really convenient when you want to start increasing the ability for you to do things. Okay, so now we can see that we're starting to get some good stuff here. We've got these topics here. One of the things that Springboard does is it actually has a pretty sophisticated queue system that will take user data and donation data, which comes from UberCart in 6 and Drupal Commerce in 7, and it will create those as objects, which are then put into a queue, which can then be synced up to Salesforce. Really, really fun stuff. But one of the things that we do have are all of these hooks that allow us to do things or change things in the process. So I was actually tasked with creating, right after I was hired, taking a module to do an upsell. So when someone actually does a donation, it does a pop-up modal window saying, hey, thanks so much for your donation. Would you like to take that single donation and turn it into a monthly one ongoing? And we had actually had someone else had started that module, and I was tasked with finishing it. They'd done some of the stuff, getting through and trying to figure out how to actually create the objects in the right way and put them in the queue and make sure that was processed properly and do all that stuff, and affect the things that were already in the queue because we had to adjust the donation that had just been made and all these other fun things. That took a little bit of doing, and luckily the lead developer, Philip, stepped in and gave me an example, which he pretty much did all of that piece of the work for me. He's like, here, something like this should work, and I was like, oh, hey, yeah, that almost does. Let me make a few changes, and now we're good to go. But I didn't have this. So if I'd had, it would have been not only easier to do, but instead of me trying to figure out one piece at a time and understand the bigger picture, it's so much easier to see it all in one place, figure out what's going on, and then start to build kind of a fuzzy map in my head of how all of these things fit together, which would have made it a lot easier to do what I needed to do. But, you know, trial by fire. That's how that stuff works. So anyway, that's, I think that is it. So I'm done. If there's any questions anybody has, I will do my best to answer them. Just remember your homework. Anybody? No? Cool. Well, thanks, guys.